The moment I saw that white Lexus parked diagonally across my newly planted alfalfa field, blocking the irrigation line I had just spent 3 days installing, I knew my patience with Margaret Williams was about to run out. I had moved to Ridgewood Estates, a sprawling development outside Boise, Idaho, about 8 months ago, looking for some peace after my divorce. The property was technically part of the HOA, but my 5 acres sat at the very edge, with 3 of those acres classified as agricultural land that I had specifically negotiated to keep outside HOA jurisdiction. I had the surveys, the county records, and a letter from the HOA's own lawyer at the time of purchase confirming this arrangement. None of that seemed to matter to Margaret Williams, the HOA president, who had made it her personal mission to make my life miserable since the day I refused to remove my tractor from my own driveway. My name is Andrew Turner, and I am a 42-year-old former software engineer who decided that staring at code for 12 hours a day was slowly killing me. I bought this property with the dream of running a small, sustainable farm, nothing fancy, just enough to sell at farmers' markets and maybe supply a few local restaurants. I had my John Deere 5075E tractor, a small herd of chickens, 2 goats named Hank and Dolly, and big plans for organic vegetables. What I did not plan for was Margaret. Margaret Williams was 53 years old, with that specific haircut that seemed to be regulation issue for HOA presidents. A blonde bob with chunks and highlights that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. She drove a white Lexus RX 350, wore velour tracksuits in various pastel colors, and had a voice that could cut through steel when she was complaining, which was always. She lived in the main part of the development, in one of those cookie-cutter McMansions that all looked identical except for the house numbers. The first time she parked on my field was 2 weeks ago. I had come out in the morning to check on my newly planted seeds and found her car sitting right there, 20 feet from the road, on my land. When I knocked on her window, she had rolled it down exactly 2 inches and informed me that she was having a phone conference and needed somewhere quiet to park. I told her she was on my private agricultural land and needed to move. She told me that all land in Ridgewood Estates was subject to HOA rules and she would park wherever she pleased. Then she rolled up the window and continued her call. I had stood there for a moment, genuinely stunned. Then I walked back to my house, pulled out my property documents, and took photos of her car with the survey markers visible in the frame. When she finally left an hour later, she had driven right over a section of field I had just prepared for planting, leaving deep tire ruts in the soft soil. The second time was 4 days after that. Same spot, same attitude. This time she claimed she was waiting for a repair person to arrive at her house and wanted to be able to see when they drove into the development. The entrance was half a mile away, and her house was in the opposite direction. When I pointed this out, she told me I was harassing her and that she would be filing a complaint with the HOA board. I reminded her that she was the HOA board president. She said good, then the complaint would be taken very seriously. I called the non-emergency police line that time. The dispatcher was sympathetic, but explained that for a civil trespassing matter like this, I would need to go through the process of formally warning her in writing first. Then if she continued, I could pursue it legally. The officer who came out was professional and talked to Margaret, who had moved her car by the time he arrived. He confirmed that based on my survey documents, she had indeed been parked on my private land. He advised her not to return. She smiled sweetly and said it must have been an honest mistake. The third time was yesterday. Not only had she parked on my field, but she had also brought 2 other HOA board members with her. They had a folding table set up, and they were having an actual HOA meeting on my property. When I walked out there, Margaret informed me that they were discussing installing a community dog park, and my field was the perfect location. I told her that my field was not community property, and I was actively farming it. She said that the original development plans had included a dog park in this area, and just because I had bought the land did not mean I could ignore the community's needs. I lost my temper then. I told her that if she ever set foot on my land again, I would have her arrested. She laughed at me, actually laughed, and said that I clearly did not understand how HOA governance worked. Then she handed me a citation for having farm equipment visible from the street, another violation for having an unapproved structure, which was my chicken coop, and a third citation for creating a public nuisance with animal odors. Each citation came with a $50 fine. I spent last night doing research. I found out that Margaret had been HOA president for 6 years. I found dozens of complaints about her online, on neighborhood forums and next door. She had apparently driven out at least 4 families with her constant harassment. One family had planted roses in their front yard without approval and received daily citations until they moved. Another had painted their front door navy blue instead of the approved colonial blue and faced thousands in fines before giving up and selling. I also discovered that Margaret's real estate company, Williams Premier Properties, had coincidentally purchased all 4 of those homes at below market value and resold them at substantial profits. It was a nice little racket. Harass people until they were desperate to leave, buy their homes cheap, flip them, and profit. I printed out everything I found and put it in a folder. Then I went to bed determined to call a lawyer in the morning. This morning, I woke up at 6, like always, and went out to feed the chickens and goats. That was when I saw the Lexus, parked in the exact same spot as yesterday, only this time it was directly on top of my irrigation line. I walked closer and saw that the weight of the car had crushed the PVC pipe I had just installed. Water was bubbling up through the soil, flooding that section of the field. Something inside me snapped, not in a loud, explosive way, but in a quiet, decisive way. I had tried being reasonable. I had tried documentation, police, polite requests, and firm demands. None of it had worked. Margaret Williams had made it clear that she believed she was above the rules, that my property rights meant nothing, and that she could do whatever she wanted without consequences. I walked back to my barn, climbed into my tractor, and started the engine. The John Deere roared to life, that deep diesel rumble that I normally found comforting. I had a heavy-duty front loader bucket attached, which I used for moving soil and gravel. I drove across the field, the big tires gripping the soft earth easily. As I approached the Lexus, I could see Margaret inside, talking on her phone again. She glanced up, saw the tractor coming, and her eyes went wide. She made a shooing motion with her hand, like I was a stray dog bothering her. I kept coming. When I was about 10 feet away, she actually rolled down her window and shouted something at me. I could not hear her over the engine, and I did not care. I positioned the tractor behind her car, lowered the front loader until it was just below the height of her rear bumper, and then slowly, carefully started pushing. The Lexus started rolling forward. Margaret's shouting got louder, more frantic. She was fumbling with her keys, trying to start the car, but it did not matter. My tractor weighed over 6,000 pounds with the loader attached, and it pushed her luxury SUV like it was a toy. The Lexus rolled forward across the field, picking up speed as I gave it more throttle. At the edge of my property, there was a drainage ditch. It was about 4 feet deep and 6 feet wide, designed to handle runoff during Idaho's spring melt. Right now, in late April, it had about a foot of muddy water in the bottom. I aimed the Lexus straight for it. Margaret must have realized what was about to happen because her door flew open and she tumbled out, landing in the muddy field. The Lexus, now unoccupied, rolled forward and dropped nose first into the ditch with a spectacular splash and crunch. The rear end stuck up in the air for a moment, then settled at a steep angle, water flooding into the interior through the open driver's door. I stopped the tractor, put it in neutral, and climbed down. Margaret was on her hands and knees in the mud, her pastel pink tracksuit now brown with dirt. She looked up at me with an expression of such pure shock and rage that I almost felt bad. Almost. "You pushed my car into a ditch," she said, her voice strangled. "You parked on my field and broke my irrigation system," I replied calmly. "Again, after being warned multiple times. After being told by police not to trespass. I am going to have you arrested," she screamed, struggling to her feet. "That is assault. That is destruction of property. That is trespassing," I finished, "which is what you are doing, right now on my land." She opened her mouth, closed it, then pulled out her phone. Of course, she had somehow kept hold of her phone through the whole thing. She started dialing, her fingers shaking with rage. "Yes, I need police immediately," she said when someone answered. "I am being assaulted. A man just pushed my car into a ditch with a tractor. Ridgewood Estates, the agricultural lot at the East End. Yes, I will stay on the line. No, I am not in immediate danger now. He is just standing there looking smug." I was not looking smug. I was looking at the crushed irrigation pipe and calculating how much time it would take to repair. I was also thinking about whether I had just made a huge mistake, but I found that I did not really care. Sometimes you reach a point where you are tired of being pushed around and you push back. The police arrived about 15 minutes later. In the meantime, Margaret had continued screaming at me, threatening lawsuits, jail time, and financial ruin. I had walked back to my barn, parked the tractor, and then returned with my folder of documentation and my phone, which had photos of her car on my property from all 3 previous incidents, time-stamped and geotagged. 2 officers got out of the patrol car, and I recognized one of them as Officer James Morrison, who had responded to my call about Margaret the second time she parked on my field. He looked at the Lexus in the ditch, looked at Margaret covered in mud, looked at me, and sighed. "Mr. Turner," he said. "Want to tell me what happened here?" I explained calmly and clearly. I showed him the photos on my phone. I showed him the crushed irrigation pipe still leaking water. I showed him the survey documents proving this was my land. I showed him the written warning I had sent Margaret via certified mail after the second incident, which she had signed for. I had copies of everything. Officer Morrison listened, took notes, and then went to talk to Margaret. That conversation was much louder. Margaret was demanding I be arrested immediately. She was talking about assault, about reckless endangerment, about destruction of property. The officer let her talk herself out, then asked some questions. Had she been on Mr. Turner's property? Yes, but she had every right because of HOA easements. Did she have documentation of these easements? They were in the HOA files. Had Mr. Turner warned her previously not to park here? Yes, but he did not have the authority to ban her from community property. The second officer, whose name tag Reed Patterson, walked around the scene, took photos, and examined the irrigation pipe. Then both officers consulted with each other in low voices by their patrol car. Finally, Officer Morrison came back. "Mr. Turner, what you did was not legal. You cannot use a vehicle to move someone else's vehicle off your property, even if they are trespassing. That constitutes destruction of property at minimum. My heart sank. So I was going to be arrested after all. However, he continued, Miss Williams was undeniably trespassing on clearly marked private property after multiple warnings. She has also caused property damage to your irrigation system. Given the circumstances, here is what is going to happen. We are going to write this up as a civil dispute. Miss Williams, you need to arrange for a tow truck to remove your vehicle. Mr. Turner, Miss Williams will likely sue you for the damage to her car, and you will need to respond to that through the courts. I strongly suggest you get a lawyer. Both of you are going to stop this nonsense right now, or the next time we come out here, somebody is going to jail for real. Am I clear? She has been harassing me for months, I said. And you just pushed her car into a ditch, Officer Morrison said. Which means you escalated a civil dispute into a criminal act. Like I said, get a lawyer. Both of you. Margaret started to protest, but Officer Patterson cut her off. Madam, you were trespassing. We have that documented now. If you continue to park on Mr. Turner's property, you will be cited and potentially arrested. The HOA does not override property rights or county ordinances. If you believe you have an easement, you need to prove that through legal channels, not by repeatedly parking wherever you want. But the community needs, Margaret started. The community needs to respect property boundaries, Officer Morrison said firmly. Now, I suggest you call that tow truck. The officers left after making both of us confirm we understood. Margaret glared at me with such hatred that I instinctively took a step back. You have no idea what you have just done, she hissed. I will destroy you. I will fine you every single day until you are bankrupt. I will make your life so miserable you will beg to sell me this property. Looking forward to it, I said, surprised by how calm I felt. She pulled out her phone and called for a tow truck. Then she called someone else, her voice switching to a sugary, sweet tone. Hi, Deborah, it is Margaret. Yes, I am fine, but I need your help with something. That awful man with the farm has completely lost his mind. I walked back to my house and immediately called the lawyer whose name I had written down last night. His name was Richard Foster, and according to online reviews, he specialized in property disputes and HOA conflicts. His secretary said he was with a client but would call me back within the hour. I spent that time repairing the irrigation line. The damage was worse than I had initially thought. About 10 feet of pipe was crushed, and I had to cut out the damaged section and splice in new pipe. It took me 2 hours, and by the time I was done, I was covered in mud and water. As I was finishing, I heard a tow truck arrive and watched as they winched Margaret's Lexus out of the ditch. The front end was smashed, the hood crumpled, and muddy water poured out of the interior. The tow truck driver shook his head and said something to Margaret that made her face turn red. My phone rang just as they were driving away. It was Richard Foster. Mr. Turner, my secretary said you have an HOA dispute that involves a tractor and a ditch. I have to admit, that is a new one. I explained everything from the beginning, all the months of harassment, Margaret's pattern of driving out homeowners, the repeated trespassing, and finally this morning's incident. I sent him the photos, the documentation, everything I had. He was quiet for a long moment after I finished. Okay, this is both better and worse than I thought. The good news is that you have documented everything, you gave proper warnings, and she was absolutely trespassing. The bad news is that you used your tractor to push her car into a ditch, which is vigilante justice and not legal. She is definitely going to sue you, probably for the full value of the car plus emotional distress, lost wages, punitive damages, everything she can think of. How much are we talking? I asked. Her car is probably a total loss, so $50,000 to $60,000 for the vehicle, plus whatever else she piles on. Could be 100,000 or more if she is vindictive, which she sounds like she is. I felt sick. I did not have that kind of money. What are my options? We fight it. We document everything. We show the pattern of harassment. We show that she was warned repeatedly and ignored those warnings. We show that you suffered property damage. We file a countersuit for trespassing, property damage, harassment, and emotional distress. We also file complaints with the county about her abuse of HOA authority. And honestly, Mr. Turner, based on what you have told me about her buying properties she harassed people out of, we might want to report this to the Idaho Attorney General's office. That sounds like it could be fraud or racketeering. Racketeering. That seems extreme. Using her position in the HOA to harass homeowners into selling, then profiting from those sales through her real estate company. That is textbook abuse of authority for financial gain. If she has done this multiple times, it is a pattern. The AG might be very interested. Okay, I said, feeling a little bit of hope. What do I need to do? First, I need you to send me everything you have, every document, every photo, every email, every text message, everything. Second, do not communicate with her at all about anything. Every word you say can and will be used against you. Third, if she or any HOA representative tries to fine you or take any action, document it but do not respond. Send everything to me. Fourth, start documenting your emotional state. If you are losing sleep, if you are stressed, if this is affecting your health, write it down. We need to show that her harassment has damaged you. This is really happening, I said quietly. Yes, it is. But Mr. Turner, between you and me, I have dealt with people like Margaret Williams before. They are bullies who are used to getting their way because most people back down. The fact that you pushed back, even though you did it in a legally questionable way, means she is probably going to make mistakes. Bullies get sloppy when someone stands up to them. We are going to catch those mistakes. I hired him on the spot. His retainer was $3,000, which hurt but was necessary. After I hung up, I sat down at my kitchen table and just breathed for a few minutes. What had I done? I had pushed a woman's car into a ditch with my tractor. That was insane. That was something people joked about, not something people actually did, but she had been trespassing. She had damaged my property. She had harassed me for months. And the police had basically given us both a warning and told us to work it out in court. So maybe it was not as insane as it seemed. The rest of the day was quiet, which made me nervous. I kept expecting Margaret to show up with more HOA board members, or with a sheriff to serve papers, or with a news crew to paint me as a violent maniac. But nothing happened. I fed the animals, worked on repairing some fence posts, and tried to keep my mind occupied. That evening, my nearest neighbor, a retired firefighter named Bill Harrison, drove up my driveway in his pickup truck. Bill lived about a quarter-mile away and had always been friendly in a distant way. We waved when we saw each other but did not socialize much. "Andrew," he said, getting out of his truck. "I heard about what happened this morning." Of course he did. This was a small community and news traveled fast. "Yeah," I said. "It was not my finest moment." "Are you kidding?" Bill said, and to my surprise he was grinning. "That is the best thing anyone has done in this neighborhood in years. Margaret Williams has been a nightmare since she became HOA president. She tried to fine me because my truck was dirty, said it was an eyesore. It is a truck. It gets dirty. That is what trucks do. She is probably going to sue me into oblivion," I said. "Maybe, but you know what? Half the neighborhood is on your side. We have a group chat going, the unofficial Ridgewood Estates chat that Margaret does not know about, and it is blowing up. People are talking about finally standing up to her, about filing formal complaints, about voting her out at the next HOA meeting." "When is the next HOA meeting?" I asked. 2 weeks. And I guarantee you it is going to be packed. People are tired of her garbage. That made me feel a little better. At least I was not completely alone in this. Bill stayed for another 20 minutes, sharing his own horror stories about Margaret. Apparently, she had tried to ban his daughter from using the community pool because she had a small, tasteful tattoo on her shoulder. She had complained about holiday decorations, about noise levels during a backyard birthday party for a 5-year-old, about someone planting vegetables instead of flowers in their front yard. The list went on and on. After Bill left, I made dinner, fed the animals one more time, and tried to watch some television. I could not focus. My mind kept replaying the moment the Lexus dropped into the ditch, the look on Margaret's face, the sound of the crunch. I had really done that. There was no taking it back. The next morning, I found an envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a formal notice from the Ridgewood Estates HOA, signed by Margaret Williams, informing me that I was being fined $500 for threatening and violent behavior toward HOA personnel. There was also a demand that I remove all farm equipment from my property within 30 days, or face a fine of $100 per day. And there was a notice that the HOA board was pursuing legal action to enforce community standards and possibly foreclose on my property for continued willful violations. I took pictures of everything and sent it to Richard Foster. He called me back within an hour. "She is panicking," he said, and he sounded pleased. "This is exactly what I was talking about. She is overreaching massively. She has no authority to fine you for behavior that happened on your own private property. She definitely does not have authority to demand you remove farm equipment from agricultural land, and the threat of foreclosure is laughable. She is trying to intimidate you, and in doing so, she is making our case stronger. So what do I do? Nothing. Do not pay the fines, do not respond, do not engage. Just send me everything she sends you. In the meantime, I am going to file a restraining order against her for harassment. We are also going to file a formal complaint with the HOA board, copying in every homeowner in the development, documenting her pattern of abuse. And I am going to reach out to some of the families she drove out and see if they will provide statements." "This is getting big," I said. "Yes, it is. But Mr. Turner, you need to understand something. Margaret has been doing this for years, unchecked. Someone had to stand up to her eventually. That someone ended up being you, and now we are going to make sure she faces consequences." 2 days later, I was served with a lawsuit. Margaret Williams was suing me for $85,000. The lawsuit claimed destruction of property, emotional distress, lost wages because she could not work without her car, defamation, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. I read through it with Richard on a video call. "This is actually good," Richard said. "How is me being sued for $85,000 good? Because she filed it in a hurry, and it is sloppy. Look at the defamation claim. She says you defamed her by telling neighbors she is a bad HOA president. But defamation requires a false statement. If she actually is a bad HOA president, and we can prove that, then it is not defamation. An intentional infliction of emotional distress requires conduct that is so outrageous that it exceeds all bounds of decency. Was pushing her car into a ditch outrageous? Sure. But she was trespassing on your land after repeated warnings and had just caused property damage. Context matters." He walked me through the whole lawsuit, explaining what each claim meant and how we would respond. We would admit that, yes, I pushed her car into the ditch, but we would argue that it was a reasonable response to ongoing criminal trespassing and property damage. We would file a countersuit for thousands of dollars in damages from her repeated trespassing, the irrigation system, the stress and harassment. We would also be including evidence of her pattern of abuse toward other homeowners. "This is going to get ugly," Richard warned me. "She is not going to back down easily, and neither are we." "Are you prepared for that?" "I am already in it," I said. "Might as well see it through." The next week was relatively quiet, which I knew was just the calm before the storm. I worked on my farm, took care of the animals, and tried to keep my anxiety under control. Richard filed our response and countersuit, which I knew would set Margaret off. Sure enough, 3 days after that, I received a notice that the HOA was holding an emergency meeting to discuss my membership status. The meeting was scheduled for the following Tuesday evening at 7 at the community center. All homeowners were invited to attend. I called Richard. "Can they kick me out of the HOA?" "They can try, but it would not affect your property rights. You would still own your land. The worst they could do is refuse you access to community amenities, which, given that you do not use the pool or the clubhouse, would not really matter." But honestly, I think this is going to backfire on her. "Bill Harrison told you people are upset, right? Let us see how upset." Tuesday evening came, and I drove to the community center with a knot in my stomach. The parking lot was packed. I had to park on the street. When I walked into the main room, there were at least 60 people there, maybe more. The room was set up with chairs facing a table at the front where Margaret sat with the other 2 HOA board members, Deborah Chen and Frank Miller. Margaret's eyes locked onto me the moment I walked in, and her expression was pure venom. I found a seat in the back, next to Bill Harrison, who gave me a nod of encouragement. Margaret called the meeting to order, her voice cutting through the chatter. "Thank you all for coming. We have called this emergency meeting to address a serious matter affecting the safety and integrity of our community. As many of you are aware, Mr. Andrew Turner, who purchased the agricultural property at the east end of our development, has engaged in violent and threatening behavior toward HOA leadership." There was some murmuring in the crowd. I saw a few people looking at me, some with sympathy, some with curiosity. "Specifically," Margaret continued, "Mr. Turner used a tractor to push my personal vehicle into a drainage ditch, causing extensive damage and placing my life in danger. This kind of behavior cannot be tolerated in our community. The board is proposing that Mr. Turner's HOA membership be suspended, that he be banned from all community facilities, and that we pursue all legal remedies to remove him from this development." "That is not the whole story," someone called out. I recognized the voice as belonging to Sarah Martinez, a young mother who lived 2 streets over. Margaret's face tightened. "Excuse me, but I have the floor." "And we want to hear his side," Sarah said, standing up. "You have been harassing people in this neighborhood for years, Margaret. Maybe it is time someone stood up to you." The room erupted. People started talking over each other, some supporting Margaret but more supporting Sarah's statement. I heard phrases like "she tried to find me for," and "the HOA has too much power," and "this is ridiculous." Margaret banged a gavel on the table. "Order, we will have order. This meeting is not about my leadership. This is about Mr. Turner's dangerous actions." Bill Harrison stood up. "Actually, Margaret, your leadership is exactly what this is about. You have abused your position for years. You have harassed homeowners, invented violations, and made living here miserable for anyone who does not do exactly what you want. Andrew pushed your car into a ditch because you were parked on his private property for the 4th time after being warned by the police not to trespass. Maybe, if you had respected his property rights, your car would not be totaled." "How dare you?" Margaret shouted, her face turning red. "I have given 6 years of my life to this community and made everyone miserable in the process," someone else called out. The meeting devolved into chaos. People were standing up, shouting, arguing. Some were defending Margaret, saying that rules existed for a reason and the HOA needed strong leadership. But many more were attacking her, bringing up years of grievances and complaints. I just sat there, watching it all unfold, feeling surreal. Finally, Frank Miller, one of the other board members, stood up and raised his hands. "Everyone, please. This is not productive. I move that we table the discussion of Mr. Turner's membership and instead conduct a full review of HOA governance and leadership. We clearly have some internal issues that need to be addressed." "Seconded," Deborah Chen said immediately, looking relieved. Margaret looked like she wanted to explode, but she was outvoted. The motion passed and the meeting was adjourned. As people filed out, several came up to me to offer support. Sarah Martinez shook my hand. An older gentleman named Robert introduced himself and said he was a retired lawyer and would be happy to provide a statement about Margaret's behavior. A woman named Jennifer said she had been considering moving because of HOA harassment, but now felt hopeful that things might change. Bill clapped me on the shoulder. "That went better than expected." "Did it?" I asked. I felt drained. "Margaret is losing control. Did you see her face? She knows she is in trouble now. The board is turning against her and the homeowners are done with her garbage. This might actually work out." I drove home feeling cautiously optimistic. Maybe this would work out. Maybe standing up to Margaret, even in the dramatic and probably ill-advised way I had done it, would actually lead to positive change. That optimism lasted until the next morning, when I found all 4 of my chicken coop windows smashed and the gate to the goat pen left open. Hank and Dolly were missing. I immediately called the police and then started searching for my goats. I found Dolly about a quarter mile away, tangled in some brush. She was scared but unharmed. Hank was missing for 3 hours before I found him nearly a mile away, limping because he had cut his leg on barbed wire. The police came out, took a report, and examined the damage. There was no evidence of who had done it, no fingerprints, no witnesses. But I knew. Deep in my gut, I knew it was Margaret or someone acting on her behalf. Officer Morrison seemed to know it too. "Mr. Turner, I cannot prove anything without evidence, but I am going to drive by your property a few extra times over the next week. I suggest you install security cameras." "I am installing them today," I said grimly. I spent the entire day setting up a security system. I bought 4 wireless cameras with night vision and mounted them to cover the driveway, the barn, the chicken coop, and the goat pen. I also bought motion-activated lights and installed those around the perimeter of the house. It cost me almost $1,000 I did not really have, but I was not going to let someone vandalize my property and hurt my animals. I reported the incident to Richard Foster, who added it to our growing file. "We can mention this in our filings, but without proof it is just an allegation. But keep those cameras running. If she or someone she hired comes back, we will have them." The next few days were tense. I barely slept, jumping at every sound. The cameras caught plenty of wildlife, possums and raccoons and even a fox, but no human activity. Hank's leg healed slowly, and I had to keep him separated from Dolly to prevent him from running around too much. Then, exactly 1 week after the emergency HOA meeting, I received notice that the HOA board was holding a vote of no confidence regarding Margaret Williams. The vote would take place at the regularly scheduled monthly meeting, and all homeowners in good standing were encouraged to attend and vote. "This is huge," Richard said when I forwarded him the email. "Frank and Deborah are making their move. They know Margaret is a liability now and they are trying to distance themselves. Will it work? Depends on the vote. But based on what you described from that emergency meeting, I think she is in real trouble." The monthly meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday. In the meantime, life continued. I planted more seeds, repaired the last of the damage from Margaret's repeated trespassing, and tried to keep my stress levels under control. The cameras kept recording, but nothing suspicious happened. On Wednesday, the day before the meeting, I received a phone call from an unknown number. I almost did not answer, but something made me pick up. "Hello, Mr. Turner. My name is Linda Patterson. You do not know me, but I used to live in Ridgewood Estates. Bill Harrison gave me your number." "Okay," I said cautiously. "I heard about what happened with Margaret Williams. I just want you to know, she did the same thing to me and my husband 3 years ago. We had a vegetable garden in our backyard. Nothing fancy, just some tomatoes and cucumbers. She said it was against HOA rules, that we could only have ornamental plants. We fought it, and she started fining us every single day, $50 a day. When we refused to pay, she put a lien on our house. We ended up selling to her real estate company just to get out from under the debt." "I am sorry that happened to you," I said. "The thing is, after we sold, I did some research. There was never any HOA rule against vegetable gardens. She made it up. But by the time I figured that out, we had already moved. I talked to a lawyer, but he said it would cost more to fight than we would get back, so we just let it go. But I still have all the documentation, the fake violations, the fines, everything. If it would help your case, I would be happy to provide it." "That would help immensely," I said. "Can I give you my lawyer's contact information?" She agreed, and I immediately called Richard to tell him. He was thrilled. "This is the pattern we need. If we can get statements from multiple families, we can show that Margaret has been systematically abusing her authority for financial gain. The Attorney General is definitely going to be interested." By Thursday evening, Richard had statements from Linda Patterson and 2 other former Ridgewood Estates residents, all with similar stories of harassment, fake violations, and being pressured to sell their homes to Williams Premier Properties. He had compiled everything into a formal complaint and submitted it to the Idaho Attorney General's office that morning. The monthly HOA meeting was even more packed than the emergency meeting had been. I estimated close to 80 people crammed into the community center. The energy in the room was electric, everyone whispering and speculating. Margaret sat at the front table, looking defiant. Deborah and Frank sat on either side of her, both looking uncomfortable. Frank called the meeting to order. "As you all know from the notice, tonight we will be holding a vote of no confidence regarding our current HOA president, Margaret Williams. Before we vote, both sides will have an opportunity to speak. Margaret, would you like to address the community?" Margaret stood up, smoothing her blouse. Tonight, she wore a business suit instead of her usual tracksuit, trying to look professional and authoritative. "Thank you, Frank. I know there have been some concerns about my leadership. I want to assure everyone that everything I have done has been in the best interest of this community. Yes, I enforce the rules. That is my job. Rules exist to protect our property values and maintain the standards that make Ridgewood Estates such a desirable place to live." She went on for 10 minutes, talking about her years of service, the improvements she had overseen, the problems she had solved. She did not mention the harassment, the fake violations, or the families she had driven out. She painted herself as a dedicated public servant who was being unfairly attacked by troublemakers who did not want to follow the rules. When she finished, Frank asked if anyone wanted to speak in opposition. Bill Harrison immediately stood up. "Margaret talks about protecting property values," Bill said. "But what she does not mention is that her real estate company has made hundreds of thousands of dollars buying homes from people she harassed into leaving. I have documentation here showing that in the last 4 years, Williams Premier Properties has purchased 7 homes in this development, all from owners who were facing heavy HOA fines. She creates the problem, then profits from it. That is not leadership. That is corruption. The room erupted. Margaret tried to shout over the noise, claiming that her business dealings were completely separate from her HOA duties, that it was all coincidence, that Bill was making false accusations. Then, Sarah Martinez stood up. Margaret tried to ban my daughter from the pool because she has a medical alert bracelet. She said it was not appropriate jewelry. My daughter is diabetic. That bracelet could save her life. When I explained that, Margaret said rules were rules and I needed to take it up with the board. But Margaret is the one who makes the rules. More people stood up, one after another, sharing their own stories. The man who had been fined for having a dirty truck. The woman who had been cited for having Christmas lights up 2 days past the January 1st deadline. The family who had been threatened with foreclosure because their grass was half an inch too long during a drought when watering restrictions were in effect. It went on for over an hour. Margaret tried to respond to each accusation, but she was drowning in the weight of years of grievances. Finally, Frank called for the vote. All in favor of removing Margaret Williams as HOA president, please raise your hand. I looked around the room. Nearly every hand went up. I raised mine too. All opposed. Maybe 10 hands went up, mostly people who sat near Margaret or had business connections with her. The motion passes, Frank said. Margaret, effective immediately, you are removed as HOA president. Please surrender all HOA documents and property to the board within 72 hours. Margaret stood there for a moment, her face white with shock and rage. Then she grabbed her purse and stormed out of the community center, slamming the door behind her so hard the walls shook. The room broke into applause and relieved chatter. Frank and Deborah immediately started discussing transitional leadership and called for nominations for a new president. Bill Harrison was nominated and quickly elected. He accepted and immediately announced that his first act would be to conduct a full audit of HOA finances and actions over the past 6 years. I left the meeting feeling lighter than I had in months. It was not over. Margaret was still suing me, and I still faced potential legal consequences for the tractor incident, but the community had spoken. Margaret's reign of terror was done. The next morning, I was out feeding the chickens when Richard Foster called. "Andrew, I have news." The Attorney General's office just contacted me. They are opening a formal investigation into Margaret Williams and Williams Premier Properties. They are looking at fraud, abuse of authority, and potentially racketeering. This is big. What does that mean for my case? I asked. It means we have a much stronger position. If the AG finds evidence of criminal behavior, Margaret is going to have much bigger problems than suing you. In fact, I would not be surprised if she drops the lawsuit entirely to try to minimize her exposure. And what about me? Am I off the hook for the tractor thing? Legally, you still committed destruction of property. But given the circumstances, the pattern of harassment, and the fact that she was trespassing, I think if it goes to court, a jury would be sympathetic. Plus, if Margaret is facing criminal charges, she is not going to want to be in a courtroom where we get to present all the evidence of her harassment. My guess is she will drop the lawsuit or settle for a minimal amount. I hope you are right, I said. Over the next few weeks, things moved quickly. The Attorney General's office subpoenaed HOA records and financial documents from Williams Premier Properties. They interviewed former residents, including Linda Patterson and the others who had provided statements. The local newspaper ran a story about the investigation, and suddenly, Margaret Williams was infamous throughout boys. The new HOA board, led by Bill Harrison, conducted their audit and found serious irregularities. Margaret had been collecting fines that were never properly documented. Money that should have gone into the HOA general fund had disappeared. There were payments to her real estate company for consulting services that nobody could explain. Bill turned all of this over to the Attorney General. Meanwhile, my lawsuit with Margaret was in a holding pattern. Her lawyer filed for delays, citing the ongoing criminal investigation. Richard was happy to wait. The longer this drags out, the better for us. Every day brings more evidence of her misconduct. My security cameras caught one more incident about a month after Margaret was removed from the HOA. At 2 in the morning, a car slowly drove past my house, then stopped near the end of the driveway. Someone got out and appeared to be looking around, possibly casing the property. The figure was too far away and too dark for me to identify, but the car looked similar to the rental sedan I had seen Margaret driving since her Lexus was totaled. I sent the footage to both Richard and the police. Officer Morrison came out, reviewed it, and said they would keep it on file but could not do much without a clearer identification. "But if she is dumb enough to come back, your cameras will catch her," he said. She did not come back. A week later, I learned why. The Attorney General's office had filed formal charges against Margaret Williams. 8 counts of fraud, 6 counts of abuse of authority, 2 counts of racketeering, and 1 count of extortion. She was arrested at her home early one morning, and the local news ran footage of her being led out in handcuffs. I watched the news coverage with a mixture of satisfaction and disbelief. This had all started with me being fed up with someone parking on my field. Now that person was facing decades in prison. Richard called me that afternoon. "Margaret's lawyer contacted me. They are dropping the lawsuit against you. They are also offering not to pursue any criminal charges related to the destruction of her vehicle in exchange for you agreeing not to countersue. So I am off the hook completely. Sign the settlement agreement and this whole thing is over. Well, the legal part anyway." I signed the agreement that same day. It felt surreal. Months of stress, thousands of dollars in legal fees, and it was just over. No trial, no judgment, just a signed piece of paper saying we both walked away. The criminal case against Margaret took longer to resolve. I was called to testify before a grand jury about the harassment and trespassing. So were Bill Harrison, Linda Patterson, and about a dozen others. The evidence was overwhelming. Margaret's trial was set for the following spring, but she never made it to trial. Her lawyer negotiated a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to 5 counts of fraud and 2 counts of abuse of authority. In exchange, the other charges were dropped. She was sentenced to 4 years in prison, ordered to pay over $300,000 in restitution to the families she had defrauded, and permanently banned from serving in any HOA leadership position in Idaho. Williams Premier Properties was dissolved as part of the settlement, and the real estate licenses of Margaret and her business partner were revoked. The homes she had improperly acquired were investigated, and in several cases, former owners were given the opportunity to repurchase at the original sale price or receive compensation. Life in Ridgewood Estates changed dramatically after Margaret's removal. Bill Harrison turned out to be an excellent HOA president. He streamlined the rules, got rid of the petty and arbitrary violations, and focused on actual community improvement projects. The pool got renovated, new playground equipment was installed, and community events became fun instead of stressful. As for me, I continued working on my farm. My alfalfa grew beautifully that summer, and I sold my first harvest to a local dairy farm. My chickens produced more eggs than I could eat, so I started selling them at a farmer's market in Boise. Hank and Dolly became minor celebrities in the neighborhood. People would stop by to visit them and bring treats. I never got the $3,000 I had paid in legal retainer fees back, and I was still out the money for the security system and the repairs to my irrigation line. But I considered it money well spent. I had stood up to a bully, and in doing so, I had helped free an entire community from years of harassment and corruption. The tractor incident became something of a legend. People joked about it, and occasionally someone would ask me to tell the story at a barbecue or a neighborhood gathering. I always told it honestly, including the part where I acknowledged that pushing someone's car into a ditch was not the smartest decision I ever made. But I also stood by it. Sometimes, when all the proper channels have failed, you have to take matters into your own hands. About 6 months after everything was settled, I was out in my field one afternoon, preparing the soil for a winter cover crop when Bill Harrison drove up. He got out of his truck carrying 2 beers. "Thought you might want a break," he said, handing me one. We sat on the tailgate of his truck, looking out over my field. The sun was setting, painting the Idaho sky in shades of orange and purple. "You know," Bill said, "I have been thinking about that day you pushed Margaret's car into the ditch. It was crazy. It was probably illegal. But damn if it was not the spark that this neighborhood needed." "I am just glad nobody got hurt," I said. "Margaret got hurt," Bill pointed out. "Her pride, her freedom, her bank account. She brought that on herself. If she had just respected people's property rights, if she had not been so power-hungry and greedy, none of this would have happened." True. But it took someone willing to stand up to her to expose all of that. Most people just paid the fines or moved away. "You pushed back, literally and figuratively." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking our beers and watching the sunset. Life was not perfect. I still had mortgage payments and vet bills and the constant challenges of trying to run a small farm. But I had my land, my animals, and my peace. Margaret Williams was in prison, and I was exactly where I wanted to be. "You ever regret it?" Bill asked. "The whole tractor thing," I thought about it carefully. Did I regret pushing her car into a ditch? It had caused months of legal stress, cost me thousands of dollars, and could have gone much worse if things had played out differently. But it had also exposed Margaret's corruption, freed the neighborhood from her tyranny, and resulted in actual criminal justice. "No," I said finally. "I do not regret it. I probably should, but I do not." Bill nodded. "Good. Because if you had not done it, she would still be president, still harassing people, still making everyone miserable. Sometimes the right thing and the legal thing are not the same thing." "That sounds like something that could get us both in trouble," I said. "Only if anyone is listening," Bill said with a grin. We finished our beers as the sun dipped below the horizon. Tomorrow I would be back to work, planting and tending and building my dream of a sustainable farm. But tonight, I let myself just enjoy the moment, the quiet satisfaction of knowing that I had stood up for what was right, even when it was hard, even when it was risky. Margaret Williams had tried to break me, to drive me out like she had driven out so many others. But I had pushed back, and in the end, she was the one who lost everything. The field she had tried to claim as community property was still mine, and it would remain mine. The tractor she had threatened to have removed still sat in my barn, ready for work. Life moved on in Ridgewood Estates. The community healed from years of Margaret's leadership. New families moved in, attracted by the reasonable HOA rules and friendly atmosphere. The properties she had tried to claim had decreased in value, held strong, and people started taking pride in their homes again without fear of arbitrary fines. I expanded my farming operation slowly. adding a small greenhouse and starting a subscription service for organic vegetable boxes. It was not making me rich, but it was sustainable, and it made me happy. Every morning I woke up excited to work on my land, to tend to my animals, to build something real with my own hands. The goats, Hank and Dolly, fully recovered from their adventure and became even more beloved. I added a few more chickens to the flock and built a better coop with the money I saved from not having to fight Margaret in court anymore. On the 1-year anniversary of the tractor incident, someone left a bottle of good bourbon on my porch with a note that just said, "Thank you." I never found out who it was from, but I had my suspicions. I opened it that evening and poured myself a glass, sitting on my porch and looking out over my field. The alfalfa was growing in neat rows, the irrigation system was working perfectly, and there were no white Lexuses parked where they did not belong. I raised my glass in a silent toast to standing up for yourself, to property rights, to justice, and to the simple satisfaction of knowing that bullies do not always win. Margaret Williams had learned that lesson the hard way, and I hope that wherever she was reflecting on the consequences of her actions. As for me, I had learned that sometimes you have to risk everything to protect what is yours. That community matters, that standing up for what is right matters, and that sometimes, just sometimes, pushing back against injustice with a tractor can lead to positive change. The field was mine, the land was mine, and the peace I had fought for was mine. And nobody was going to take that away from me ever again.